in a world our ancestors would barely recognize. Around the globe, the impact of human ingenuity is now everywhere. We've pushed back the limits of our planet at speeds, depths, and heights that would have left our forebears breathless. Driving all these achievements is humankind's extraordinary gift for invention. Through genius and inspiration, we've created exceptional solutions to complex problems. From the everyday to the spectacular, some good and some not so good. This series celebrates the million ways our great inventions have transformed our world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Today, as shoppers, we're spoiled for choice. It seems we can buy everything under one roof, enticed by astonishing discounts. One invention opened the door to foods out of season from across the world at prices everyone could afford. This modern consumer revolution was born from a world facing economic catastrophe, quickly rising to become the dominant retail force, helping to drive changes to the food we eat, offering us ever more convenience, but not without costs. But this revolution is far from over. It is evolving to face the needs of a fast-changing world. This is the story of a global phenomenon, the supermarket. Vast supermarkets like this can be found across the globe. Hard to imagine that just 100 years ago, they didn't exist. Their story begins in the United States, in an era markedly different from today. In the early 1900s, ordinary Americans didn't have motor cars. They walked everywhere, or those in cities caught a streetcar. The women would usually do the shopping because most of them didn't have jobs. Back then, shopping was a major part of the daily routine as shoppers walked from store to store.
If you wanted to get your fish, you'd go to the fishmonger, your meat, you'd go to the butcher, dairy to the dairy person, and so on and so forth.
Butchers, bakers, grocers, fishmongers, dry goods stores, each visit adding more time to the daily routine.
You couldn't go and pick up the item that you wanted. You'd have to talk to the shop assistant and explain what you want, and then they'd go and get it for you and bring it all together.
They went through several processes of identifying what it is you wanted, quantifying it, weighing it, packaging it, and then you paying for it, and then off you went. It was slow, it was considered, it was time-consuming from both sides. The person helping you in that store would probably have a queue of people all waiting to be served.
The experience was far from efficient for shops. Every customer needed a shop assistant to collect goods for them. But people accepted it, even found pleasure in it. Shopping was a social occasion where the opportunity to talk with the staff and other customers was considered socializing. Great if you've got time to kill.
Ain't you gone up? Used to be a nickel.
Not so great if you're in a hurry. It's a sharp contrast to today, where time is money. Cooking has now been replaced by a worldwide ready meals market worth more than $200 billion per year, with over a third of Americans eating fast food every day. This rush culture has been enabled by a fundamental shift in how customers are served, with an emphasis on convenience. Remarkably, this change wasn't initially embraced as a good thing. In 1915, one man dared to dream of overturning the centuries-old system of shopping. Visionary New Yorker Vincent Aster. He realized that he could streamline the experience by collecting several shops into one megastore. He hopes the Aster market will save shoppers from having to trawl the high street.
The idea of having everything under one roof seems obvious to us now, but back then it actually wasn't, because the status quo was that each vendor had their own specific specialty, and that was the way things were done. But to be that first person to actually think, well, hang on a second, I can make things far more sort of efficient and convenient to the consumer if I just buy everything myself and save them time so they can just come to my store instead of going everywhere else.
Aster's business model means he benefits from economies of scale and can cut costs. A winning design, or it should be. But it fails. The shops inside Aster's market are still operating in the same labor-intensive way, with one salesperson per customer. So people stay loyal to their familiar family shops and resist the change. But Aster's vision has survived, with several high street supermarkets adopting his basic innovation. They're called cooperatives. The UK's Co-op Group and Germany's Edeka Group are thriving by working together to enjoy the economies of scale that Aster once envisaged. These modern cooperatives have incorporated an innovation that Aster overlooked. It was the single missing ingredient that transformed the shopping experience we enjoy in the supermarket of today. It took another entrepreneur to see what Aster had missed. Just a year after the Aster market opened, Clarence Saunders launches his version of a large-scale shop. But with a radical twist. The Piggly Wiggly store is launched in 1916 in Memphis, Tennessee, featuring Saunders' groundbreaking innovation, self-service.
What if we just make these aisles that people can go down and actually browse the shelves themselves? We just have to sort of put things in a relatively logical place, as long as it's not everything scattered, then actually this gives the consumers the time to spend and choose and consider. If someone goes in with their list and they have to tell someone, they're just going to buy those things. Whereas if you give them the freedom to roam and browse, well, they might buy other stuff that they didn't even think of, and so more money.
By getting the shoppers to do the work, the staff can concentrate on taking their money. Fewer staff dealing with more customers. It delivers what Aster's market had missed. Some of these savings can be passed on to the customer. But still, the revolution is slow in coming. There is a vital bottleneck to the system that seems impossible to overcome: bulk. Customers are limited to purchasing only the amount of goods they can physically carry. They still need to split their shopping into several trips each week.
You don't need all that. Put those back.
Oh, gee, Mom, he likes it.
In the end, it takes a revolution in an entirely different arena to transform shopping. A crucial invention opened the door to ever-growing consumption, leading to today's annual grocery spend, exceeding $5 trillion worldwide. The invention that allows us to buy as much as we do today had nothing to do with the stores or the merchandise. It was the revolution in personalized transport.
Henry Ford's first car was mostly a handmade job, created one piece at a time. But Ford soon started a production line, assembling cars faster from quantities of all the parts on hand.
In the 20s, Henry Ford's slick mass production of motor cars helps make them affordable to many people. By 1929, nearly 80% of U.S. households owned a car, and one entrepreneur was quick to cash in.
A man called Mr. Cullen came up with the genius idea of including a car park at his superstore. Now, if you could drive there, you had the luxury of having a car.
When King Cullen opens in Queens, New York in 1930, it removes the single biggest barrier to the shopping revolution. With a car, you can shop to your heart's delight and let the car take the strain.
Before the use of the car park, people were limited to how much they could carry. It was as simple as that. And when you're having to rely on public transport or even walking, you didn't want to buy too much.
A new phenomenon has arrived, the weekly shop. King Cullen is the first true supermarket, a shop that incorporates self-service, product departments, discount pricing, marketing, and volume selling. The accepted definition of a modern supermarket.
They had a motto of pilot high, sell it low. And that meant it actually encouraged mass consumerism. By bringing your car and having it there in one place, you could really load it up with items. You could buy more, you had much more choice. And the consumer could get everything they wanted all in one place, and probably even more than they actually thought they wanted.
But the supermarket remained an American phenomenon. Europe was behind the curve and wouldn't see supermarkets emerge for decades. Even in America, the supermarket failed to impress an important type of customer. Many car owners were middle class, and in class-conscious America, supermarkets had an image problem. It's an issue modern supermarkets have learned to cope with. Modern social inequality is reportedly as bad as it was in the 1920s. It's estimated that the richest 1% may own more than 20% of our combined wealth. But today's supermarkets have evolved to cater for differing tastes and expectations. For those on tighter budgets, they offer cut price ranges and discounts, while selling quality and luxury to the discerning rich. But back in the early 1930s, wealthier customers thought supermarkets were beneath them.
Supermarkets were associated with a kind of lower status. They were selling cheaper food in bulk. It's not a sort of pleasant sort of service culture. It's about price, low price, volume, and to some extent, convenience.
One of the things that we know in consumer psychology is this notion of something being reassuringly expensive. And I think it very much has to do with how people identify themselves as well as the products they're consuming. So the status associated with them, the quality associated with them, but very importantly, how they want to feel in society in terms of their own status.
And so you get already this class distinction between who is shopping in a supermarket and who isn't.
And class snobbery was an issue beyond the scope of any supermarket chain. No amount of rebranding could change human nature. In the end, it took a global financial disaster to realign our approach to consumerism. The Great Depression began with the Wall Street stock market crash in 1929, a seismic event that snowballed into a global economic collapse. By 1933, 1 in 4 are out of a job. There are record numbers of people in debt, and more than 5,000 banks have collapsed. Foreclosures soar, with hundreds of thousands of Americans forced into homelessness. Americans no longer have the luxury of price snobbery, and supermarkets are ready to cash in.
A supermarket was able to sort of operate under economies of scale, and bulk buy in these things and therefore offer them for lower prices. So before, something that was not really very interesting to most people now became sort of the only really viable option to go and get their essentials.
Everybody was hit by the Great Depression, and that was a great leveller. And suddenly, shopping in a supermarket where food was inexpensive became much more the norm for many more people across all sorts of classes of society.
newly price-sensitive customers are now flocking to King Cullen to take advantage of the cut prices, with its car parks now appealing to the car-owning shopper. Rivals begin to compete with the King Cullen model, including Safeway and Kroger. The battle to get customers to buy more things in less time never ends. The car makes shopping easier to get home, but the shopping still has to be carried around the shop, to the till, and then to the car.
People were buying more stuff now when they went to these superstores, but they couldn't physically carry it all. You know, it would take multiple trips of bags back out and then back in again, and no one wanted that.
Supermarkets needed a way of bringing the car into the store.
It was about wheels inside the store itself, encouraging people to take more off the shelves.
The problem required an innovative leap that would transform our world forever. It was entrepreneur Sylvan Goldman who dared to imagine a shopping basket on wheels, and so in 1937 created the world's first ever shopping trolley.
Something that, again, seems so obvious to us now was actually a genius idea from the vendor's perspective, because now people, instead of lugging these heavy bags where they're very aware of how much stuff they're buying, they can put it in this lovely little thing that basically takes no effort to move along.
It might be a genius idea, but remarkably, the American public don't immediately embrace Goldman's invention.
How are you today?
I'm a feel lousy.
No, I'm sorry to hear that. Hey, something new. Say, these are pretty slick.
You noticed that, eh?
Sure did. Yeah, I bet your customers will go for them, too.
With my customers, maybe yes and maybe no. We'll see.
Go on, you know doggone well they will. Be right back.
You would have thought it would have been an immediate success. But psychologically speaking, we aren't necessarily open to new things. We shy away, better the devil you know, and we don't want to look silly. Now, if you think about it, if you've never seen a shopping trolley, what does it look like? Well, it kind of looks like a pram. So you've got men, don't forget, this is like the 30s, so very patriarchal, hypermasculine societies. They're thinking, I'm not going to walk around looking like I'm pushing a pram. And then for women, they're like, well, I'm happy to push one of these around when it has one of my babies in, but I'm not going to be pushing bread and milk around. That's just ridiculous. So even though there's like this great, invention, it has so much utility in it, it would make everyone's lives easier, there's a real pushback.
This time it doesn't take a financial disaster to change buying habits, because Mr. Goldman knows a thing or two about human psychology and how to turn public opinion around.
So what they do is they actually pay very beautiful, well-dressed actors to come in and push. And there's male actors and there's female actors, and they push as a couple and they push individually. So people start seeing them around, and they see these people that look better than them, they're dressed better than them, they seem to be having this perfect life, and they're holding it. And so eventually this association is set up between the trolley and something to aspire to.
Trolleys take off, and supermarket owners soon discover that customers are filling them faster and faster.
The shopping trolley completely revolutionized the way shoppers shop. Rather than being limited by how much they could carry in a basket or in their hands, they were encouraged by this little basket on wheels to purchase way more.
So the trolleys get bigger and bigger.
Aisles had to grow in size in order to accommodate them, because of course, the bigger the shopping trolley, then the more stuff people could buy. So that was definitely in the shopkeeper's interest.
Self-service megastores with massive car parks and convenient shopping trolleys mean more customers spending more money. But the supermarket's battle for domination is far from over. Supermarkets turn a tidy profit. But despite their success, they're still facing fierce competition from the traditional smaller stores with a loyal customer base. Once again, global catastrophe transforms the supermarket's fortunes. As Europe battled with Nazi Germany and Italy, America finds herself drawn into the war with Japan. All men aged between 18 and 45 are required to register for service, and 49 million of them do so. As the war machine ramps up, the labor force is decimated, with more than 1 in 10 of the U.S. population drafted into military service by 1945. The small stores are hit hard, struggling to maintain their service with fewer staff.
If you have 1 or 2 workers or a husband and wife and working in a shop, and one of them gets conscripted, you've just halved your labour force, and then it makes it very difficult to run that shop.
The self-service model means supermarkets are more able to adapt to the drop in the labour market.
It relies on far fewer staff than if you're relying on people being served, one customer at a time. So you can lose people to conscription and still function.
Thousands of smaller stores are forced to close. And the theory is that supermarkets are now perfectly poised to take their market share. After the war, supermarkets continued to build on their expanded customer base, heading towards domination, shifting ever greater quantities of food.
Yes, the corner grocery has really grown up. Shoppers enter the supermarket on one side, while on the other, a steady stream of products is delivered on a tight schedule every day from American farms and ranches, from distant parts of the world. Comes the great variety of foods Americans demand.
The expansion of the supermarket as the primary way in which most people in many parts of the world are shopping has a massive knock-on effect on how food is produced, and in particular on agriculture. And it relies upon huge scales of production in both farming and also distribution and manufacture.
But supermarkets continue to grow, benefiting from improvements in related industries. To meet demand, the supply chain is modernized.
Beans are cut and threshed, all in one operation.
Intensive farming sees growing and processing of food at record-breaking rates.
On the farm today, wherever you look, you see the handiwork of scientists. Improved crops, more productive soils, more useful, more efficient machinery. Scientists working to improve plant quality through breeding have given potatoes shallow eyes, so they're easier to peel. And they have also improved storage methods and field packing. Great new harvesting systems and distribution methods had to be developed to bring these crops from faraway farms fresh to our tables.
This mass production offered huge savings through economy of scale, and the suppliers were able to ship far and wide thanks to the large investment in infrastructure, the building of national roads, railways, and the development of long-distance lorries. But mass production was creating its own problems. Although the sight of plentiful, cheap foods overflowing on supermarket shelves was massively appealing to consumers, it comes at a cost.
It's important to understand that food is wasted at every step of the journey of the food process. At the farm, because a lot of it is discarded because it doesn't look good enough, isn't of the aesthetic quality or the size that is demanded by the supermarkets and the retailers. Then at the supermarkets, sometimes it's overstocked to make the shelves look full. You can't predict the exact demand for that week, so you have to have enough in stock to not disappoint your customers, because loyalty is very important.
Food wastage is a particular issue for perishable foods like meat and fruit. One simple but ingenious attempt at a solution had been around since the beginning of the supermarket days: the canning of food. Storing foods airtight in preservative liquids meant shops could stockpile them all year round, knowing they wouldn't perish. And for the less wealthy consumers, tins offer cheaper and easier access to nutritious meat, fruit, and vegetables. But for the more discerning customer, canned food can't match fresh foods. Since the 1800s, the traditional method of keeping meat, fish, and vegetables fresh has been to chill it. But although chilling slows down the growth of the microbes that spoil good food, it's merely delaying the inevitable. Retailers are desperate for a way to keep food fresh for months without cooking it or putting it in cans. The idea of freezing food had been around since a fishing trip in the frozen stretches of northern Canada inspired Clarence Birdseye to develop fast freezing in the 1920s. But there was a catch. Although the shops could stock frozen food, very few customers could store it.
So Birdseye's invented this quick freezer technology and is producing all this food. But of course, the irony is most people, certainly in the UK, but also in America, do not have freezers. So how people are shopping with and using frozen food is that they are sort of buying it on the defrost. So you'd buy it from the retailer, from the supermarket frozen, and then you would eat it the same day. That, of course, totally changes once people have domestic freezers.
The advent of home freezing in the 1940s means that for the first time, households can buy perishable foods which they can keep fresh for months, not hours or days. It's a complete revolution.
With the adoption of the freezer, you can't really overstate how much it transformed how people managed their weekly diet, their weekly shopping, their weekly cooking.
Now, here in the large freezer, you can keep frozen foods and ice cream indefinitely. And you get fast freezing of ice cubes. Now, this is a real freezing compartment. The temperature here will actually freeze food.
Once you had a freezer in your own home, well, now you can just buy tons of stuff, and if you didn't need it then, you can throw it in the freezer and it'll keep for months.
There's the frozen food package dispenser alongside. Remove one package, and another is ready for instant use.
And so if you can keep the stuff for longer, that takes away the pressure of having to be selective about what you buy. You can buy more stuff, and buying more stuff leads to more profits, and so they can offer more goods and so on. And so this sort of consumption culture just grew and grew.
An efficient supply chain allowed supermarkets to offer not just cheaper prices and greater choice, but with the aid of frozen food, they were leading the way with supplying convenience too. The timing couldn't have been better. By the late 1940s, America's Great Depression was well and truly over, and supermarkets were thriving. But while the American supermarket was growing, across the Atlantic, Europe was still yet to catch the supermarket bug. It wasn't until the 50s that Britain finally got wind of the idea, as the Tesco and Sainsbury's chains were two of the first to offer self-service stores. But it would take decades before UK supermarkets would become the norm. Even by 1957, it was still such a novelty that when Queen Elizabeth II went to the States, she took a visit to see what the fuss was all about. Throughout the 50s, the shopping revolution spread across Europe. Germany's Albrecht stores had pioneered discounting after the war, and in 1954 opens Germany's first self-service store. The Albrecht company would later rebrand as Aldi, now a major supermarket brand across Europe. Back in America, by 1954, supermarkets accounted for 40% of all grocery spend, and the share was still rising. Still hungry for a higher profit, these trailblazers introduced another innovation: a concept that transformed not just the supermarket, but the kitchen. The inspiration for this latest quantum leap came from real blue sky thinking. For a while, airlines had offered their passengers a magical new experience. With no chefs or kitchen on board, somehow a hot-cooked meal appeared. It isn't long before a high-flying supermarket exec decides to bring the idea down to earth.
The first ready meals, TV dinners, they were inspired by airplane food, which either tells you something about how people's taste now has improved, or it tells you something about how airline food has got worse, because you can't imagine anyone now bringing out a range of food based on airline food. But airline food, of course, or airline travel was glamorous, it was exciting, it was about the future. You know, you do away with normal cooking, the sort of drudgery and labour of preparing your own food, and you are going to be part of a sort of modern world.
Convenience meals have actually had a huge impact on our lifestyles, because rather than using our thinking time on designing a meal and then going and getting the ingredients, actually all of that work is done for us. Now, all you have to figure out is what you want to watch on telly while you're having your dinner.
With this abundance of convenience food, the U.S. supermarkets were finally unrivaled in the retail market. By 1960, they took over 70% of all U.S. grocery spending. Then came dried ready meals that could be made almost instantly by merely adding boiling water.
And then the ready meal evolved into even more exotic things like delights from the Far East, chow mein, and all these exotic food types that people had never even tried before could now, taste all these different culinary delights.
But the convenience gravy train hadn't dried up yet. Could there be a way to serve meals as good as a proper home-cooked meal, but instantaneously?
You still had to turn on the oven, wait for it to heat up, put it in the oven, wait half an hour, take it out, probably burn it, etc. And so it still wasn't quite as convenient as it could be.
The 1970s brings the first affordable microwaves to the home, a machine that uses electromagnetic radiation to speed cook.
Bam! Along comes the microwave oven where you can just throw your ready meal in and 4 minutes later it's ready and it's perfect, wonderful. And so this endless cycle of innovation and then improvement and iterations beyond that led to just an explosion of convenience and efficiency for the consumer.
Supermarkets have all but liberated the public from the drudgery of shopping and cooking.
Consumers that before were having to spend all their time going to all these little tiny shops, day in, day out, and getting enough food for the family, and then all this time cooking and preparing it and so on, now had all this freed up time to actually spend on doing the things that they wanted.
Imagine having to do that the hard way, by hand.
Think about how much time has then been freed up across the whole population.
The popularity of these products is reflected in booming supermarket profits, but the innovations just keep coming. So far, the success of supermarkets has been based on greater choice, convenience, and competitive pricing. But now the battle moves from the supply line to deep inside our heads. How better to lure us in?
When you go to a supermarket and you're wandering around on your own, free as a bird, you are making your own choices. And so suddenly it became imperative to sort of catch the attention, catch the eye of the consumer. This idea of having to try and seduce the shopper. You have to persuade them to buy something without having any personal contact with them, without actually being able to directly speak to them. And so you do that through branding and packaging. You also have to do it by making your shop look attractive and laying it out in a clever way.
Industry videos help train shop managers in the latest strategies.
And believe me, there's no trick or mystery to building good selling displays.
Just stack the bread so the brand name shows best and shows off the bread to best advantage. And give the specialty loaves the best display space. So I always display them as near eye level as I can, so they're easy to see and easy to reach.
Somewhere between sort of hip height and shoulder height. This is where customers are really focusing their attention when they're shopping, and this is where there's an opportunity to promote products that are really the most important ones for the supermarket to showcase.
The supermarkets employ increasingly sophisticated psychology to get the customer to buy certain products.
What we see with the post-war expansion of supermarkets and consumer society is also a kind of rise in not only market research, but also kind of psychological studies of consumers and the shopper and of retailers and manufacturers trying to understand, how to encourage this now autonomous shopper to encourage them to buy their goods.
I like this one here. Well, actually, I like them both. But I think I prefer this one a little bit.
These women are engaged in an opinion research project.
Customer behavior becomes an increasingly important weapon in the battle to increase sales. Strangely, attitudes to fruit seem to open a startling insight. Research revealed that the precise shade of banana was critical to the numbers that customers bought. Vibrant yellow bananas are less popular than a warmer shade of buttercup, which are perceived as riper and fresher.
We now know that there is a very strong correlation between, how people respond to particular colours in food. So if a banana is not the right colour, if it is too green, conversely, if it is too brown, people don't want to pick it up. It has to be the sort of perfect yellow colour.
Even though perfectly edible, customers have subconscious biases. The insights open new doors in the race for sales.
All sorts of technologies are developed to ensure that the banana arrives at the store at the right colour so that it will allow people to be sort of seduced into buying it. I mean, other products with stories like that, for instance, salmon. Natural salmon which isn't farmed, has a sort of range of colours. It can be a pinkish hue, but often it's not that kind of bright, lurid, pinky orange that we associate with farm-reared shop salmon. That's the result of certain dyes being used, certain pigments being used. And these are all examples of the kind of psychology of shopping, the psychology of retail that supermarkets have sort of adopted.
Understanding customer psychology blossoms into an important new field. As researchers discover that the positioning of produce within a store can also affect sales. As customers, it seems we fall into three distinct categories: locators, explorers, and dreamers. Nathan Watts from retail design agency Fitch explains the subtly different ways we behave when we shop.
So sometimes a shopper will be simply locating. They'll want to go and find a product that they know that they want, and they know exactly which product they want. Often the mind state may be that the customer is thinking more as an explorer. They want to explore the range. They know they maybe want to find a product in a certain category, but they don't know which one. And occasionally, a customer is in a dreaming mind state. For the dreamer, we really need to try and inspire them to select or choose something that they don't even know that they need. So for a dinner party, we can help to try and inspire the customer to actually consider a dessert for that dinner party. And therefore, in the displays, we're really trying to inspire people and get them thinking about things they hadn't thought about.
But of all the shopper types, there is one very broad category that, when it comes to parting with hard cash, presents a real challenge: the male.
So you kind of tend to see sort of gender differences within this. So women are more likely to kind of walk around, spend more time, going up and down the aisles. Men tend to be much more kind of pragmatic. I've got 5 things on my list. I need to find those 5 things.
When seducing the focused shopper, time is the supermarket's enemy. And 40 is the magic number.
We know that buying behavior changes after once you've been in the store for about 40 minutes. So if they can keep you there, you move from being sort of a targeted spender of I need to buy sort of 3 potatoes and 4 oranges to the kind of spender that just browses and kind of buys emotionally.
So the shop designers do what they can to distract the focused male.
The supermarkets will make sure that they arrange the categories in the aisles in a way that the customer kind of needs to move through each aisle to find what they're looking for.
But it's a balance. For every persuadable, focused shopper, there are many who simply don't have the time. And so supermarkets make sure they accommodate both types.
So bakery used to be a category that would sit somewhere towards the back of the store and as a destination within the supermarket. But now, for someone that just wants to maybe pick up a croissant, is that they're positioning some of those products towards the front of the supermarket to really make it convenient for the shopper who just wants to get in and out.
But the most obvious way to get people to spend more time in supermarkets is to make a good first impression.
It's no accident that when you go to a supermarket in any country in the world, you will walk in and the first thing you will see are fresh fruit and vegetables. That is always the first section, and that is because that is the most colourful, the most enticing.
But it's not just color. The supermarket experience across the globe carefully exploits all your senses. The aroma of breads and pastries that are freshly baked in-store make you feel hungry. And a hungry customer is far more likely to overbuy.
Nothing is an accident in a supermarket. It has been planned meticulously with an understanding about kind of shopping psychology.
The whole experience is carefully crafted, not just to present goods at their best, but to make each customer lose track of time.
The physical makeup of supermarkets as well is kind of not dissimilar to the things that you kind of see sort of casinos employing. So, you have, a lack of natural light. So it's kind of, don't really have, if it's raining outside, if it's sunny, you don't really notice. Very artificial lighting to help you lose track of time. No big clocks anywhere. And the music that's played, again, that's very much about kind of making you feel kind of comfortable, lulling you into the sense that, you're in a very pleasant space and this is actually an enjoyable activity. It's recreational. So kind of the point is it needs to move you from having sort of targeted sort of consumer behavior to kind of it being just something to do. I'm shopping, kind of it's a verb, it's a recreation, it's a way to spend my time. And if they can do that, they've got you hooked.
The design is still evolving. New research continually refining our shopping experience. This level of sophistication has helped supermarkets become the unrivaled force in retail. With 83% of Americans regularly using supermarkets for their food purchases. The average American store boasts over 40,000 items, an incredible range. But with the supermarket model of what you want, when you want, shipped worldwide, comes a downside.
Consumers got quite spoiled over the years by having any food available at any time of the year, anywhere in the world. And this means that we have to produce food really quickly, really efficiently, really cheaply, which also means that the production methods become very unnatural. So we're using a lot of pesticides in the fields for farming crops. We're farming animals in really horrible conditions, which are not natural, and you wouldn't want to spend any time in that way as a human being.
Supermarkets have come under pressure and have reacted by providing wider ranges of organic and free-range produce. But the biggest issue is transport. Shipping huge amounts of food across the world and into the heart of the cities is a critical contributor to global warming.
Our urban populations are growing. By 2050, 80% of the population and the globe will live in cities, which means most of the food will be consumed within cities. Even today, 20% of greenhouse gas emissions in London come from the food industry, and we'll have to do something about that.
Perhaps the greatest problem facing supermarkets goes to the core of their existence: convenience. Like many other aspects of our lives, the internet is changing everything. With the likes of Amazon, shoppers no longer need to even leave home.
Now things have moved into this era of delivery, where you don't even need your car. You just select what you need online and it comes to you.
Now that model is brilliant for the consumer, but it's not so good for the supermarket. It doesn't actually stack up for their costs.
If supermarkets are to maintain margins, they need to keep labor costs low. So they're turning to technology to bridge the gap. But technology and food don't mix.
To have the supermarkets bring the food to you isn't that easy. You know, clothes you can just bung in the back of a truck and they'll be all right. You know, maybe a little wrinkled, but they'll turn up fine. Whereas food, it has a very limited time span that it can be sent, and it's physically delicate.
So robots are being developed with the gentlest of touches to match the ability of human hands to select and even deliver the most delicate of foods.
As driverless cars become more ubiquitous, and we can expect to see an autonomous vehicle turn up, make a little ping on your doorbell and out you come and you can pick up your food out of it. Who knows, even a little robot might bring it to your doorstep.
As robots replace humans throughout the system, retail will face the biggest shift since the very beginning of the supermarket.
So in a way, over the last century, we as consumers replaced the shop assistants, and now our role in shopping is going to be replaced by the robots doing the shopping for us.
And with automation, soon we may not even have to order what we need.
With the advancements of artificial intelligence and robotics, it means that those technologies will take away the burden of us even thinking about what we need to eat. And the computers and the robots will do it for us.
Automation could be good for the environment. Automated stock management may reduce overstocking and food wastage. And high-tech efficient distribution could cut the high levels of pollution currently generated by millions of customers making individual shopping trips.
74 pence.
And the very food the supermarkets sell may radically shift.
Meat production is one of the most polluting industries on the planet, and our growing demand for meat means that we are really harming Earth. We're also looking at a future of alternative proteins, which come from either plants or potentially insects. Already a third of the world's population is eating insects. And insects are incredibly efficient as a protein source. It doesn't have to be a whole locust that you eat as a snack. It might be a flour that you're gonna add into bread or other cooked meals, which will give you the necessary protein for that day.
These products are now beginning to appear on shelves across the Western world.
And beyond that, who knows what technology might bring us? Maybe we can have molecular 3D printers that can synthesize perfectly designed food that suits our genetic profile, that is optimized in health and minimizes waste and is just perfect from start to finish. I hope that that is viable in some way, and that's what we head towards.
One thing is sure, supermarkets will not give up their market dominance lightly, evolving just as they have in the past to meet the needs of the times, selecting, growing, preparing, and delivered to our personal specification.
What made our rise from nomads to great civilization possible? What challenged the human pioneering spirit time and again? Past advanced civilizations bequeathed it to us, and over millennia, it evolved into the tremendous diversity we see today. it has become such an integral part of global cultures and religions that little else compares to it. We taxed our ingenuity to perfect it over and over. A mainstay of our nourishment, it led to new innovations that allowed us to produce enough for everyone. And now, climate change is presenting agriculture, breeders and scientists with the challenge of securing this #1 staple for the future.
So although it's commonplace and it's everyday, it's also quite extraordinary.
It is known and shared with one another by the most diverse of cultures. Across the globe, it is enjoyed in thousands of variations on a daily basis.
All the energy has gone into it and released all these nutrients that I can just digest without having to do any real work. It's great.
Families share it with one another. It's part of every meal.
So if I close my eyes, I suppose what comes to mind immediately is it's the best thing to wake up to in the morning.
The significance of this comestible goes way beyond its value as nourishment. It forms the basis of the human diet. Bread.
Breads and cereals can be found in food from all over the world, like tortillas from Mexico, pumpernickel from Scandinavia,
rice cakes from China, hush puppy from the deep south.
The concept of bread is global. France has baguette, Italy has ciabatta, and naan is ubiquitous in India. Every day in Mexico, tortillas are eaten, and in Turkey, locals have been baking flat bread since time immemorial. In Scandinavia, it's crisp bread, and Britons, too, have unique versions.
You've got your classic white loaf, you've got your English muffins, you've got your Scottish scones, you've got your Welsh bara brith, and you've got your Irish soda farls. We do bread of every type, and it's all fantastic.
Amazing variety evolved over the centuries. Different countries, different types of bread.
I think what is interesting is that, even within one continent like Europe, you can go from one country to another country and the bread types change dramatically. And even within those countries, there are lots of different bread types.
Bread is on a never-ending triumphant march.
In Korea too, less rice is being eaten in favor of more bread. It's more flexible and there are more variations. It's a trend that will be replicated across other continents. Even in Africa, more bread than maize porridge will be eaten.
It is Germany that offers the greatest and most unique diversity when it comes to bread. In fact, since 2014, Germany's bread and bread culture has UNESCO cultural heritage status. Not only does it enjoy worldwide popularity, it is also uniquely diverse. Apart from pumpernickel and whole grain, there is also white bread. Germany has 3,200 types of bread. That's more than any other country. Over the course of time, bread has engendered numerous professions. Modern-day industrial bakers, millers, bread cognoscenti, and traditional craft bakers. What they all have in common is their love of bread. But it was a long journey.
The amazing thing about bread is it tells the story of our civilization's movement from ancient times into modern society today. Around 10,000 years ago, bread was a kind of mushy cereal porridge. This cereal porridge was flawed. It ground your teeth down, it didn't taste great, and it didn't combine well with other foods. It was only when they discovered the solid loaf of bread that they realised that bread is the ultimate food.
First, we had to make an easily digestible bread from this cereal porridge, which hardens so quickly.
So if we think about innovation, what comes to mind is the wheel, which changed the course of history.
But bread was invented several millennia prior to that. And unlike meat, which must be hunted and then prepared, bread does not exist until it is prepared. So it is truly a cultural invention. It's a complete transformation of the starting materials. Cereal grains and water become bread. And just by looking at bread, we couldn't tell what it's made of, if we didn't know already. It looks, smells, tastes different. It has become a completely different product.
For thousands of years, flour, water and salt have served as the basic ingredients for a magical process that begins in the early morning hours of a bakery. Because there's one particular ingredient that belongs in every loaf.
We give our bread lots of time and love.
I think that bread is so present in culture and religion because it's not just something that even the poorest or the richest will eat, but it's something that's not actually that easy to make.
The significance of bread is already apparent in the Bible. One of Christianity's best-known rituals is the Holy Communion, where Jesus gave wine to his disciples and broke bread with them.
I think because, in a sense, it's the bottom line. It's the most accessible, democratic food. It provides nutrition to everybody on a basic level.
Bread is so basic that it has to come to serve as the symbol for food. We encounter it time and again in art and literature. If you trace bread back to its origins, the path invariably leads to ancient Egypt. Like so many things, the art of baking began here over 6,000 years ago. And sourdough is also something that we owe to the Egyptians.
Opinions differ as to who invented sourdough. Legend has it that it was ancient Egyptians. At least, this is where the oldest pieces of evidence is found. Most likely some cereal porridge, their staple food, was left in the sun and began to ferment. Reluctant to throw it away, they found that the resulting flatbread was tastier than the ones they made before.
In ancient Egypt, the word for life, aish, stood for bread. And if you give credence to an old Arab saying, then life without aish is no life at all.
Obviously, other cultures and geographical locations have different climates, different cooking methods, and different foods to put their bread with, so they come up with different types of bread.
Even today, bread, or flatbread, is still made the same way it's always been made.
As well as transforming your grain into a much more nutritious substance, it also acts as a fermenting agent during the bread-making process, turning your lump of flour and water into a light, fluffy loaf of bread. It's how the Egyptians made their bread, and it must have seemed like magic.
Part of this magical process is fermentation. It makes for a soft and airy dough. It's why the ancient Egyptians were referred to as bread eaters by the Greeks.
A decent loaf of bread takes skill, it takes good grain, it takes the right cooking equipment, it takes the right recipe, and it takes a lot of patience. All of those things need to come together to make a loaf of bread.
In today's industrial-scale bakeries, fermentation still takes place the way it did in ancient Egypt. Bacteria in the so-called sourdough trigger a fermentation process, the basis for an internal airy texture. Flour and sourdough are mixed and left to ripen into easily digestible bread within 40 hours.
Producing something like sourdough bread is no easy process, and even with machines that can theoretically do it all for you, you've got to keep a really close eye on temperature, on cooling processes, on Lent fermentation, and yeast and sourdough can behave in very unpredictable ways. So even with machinery, it needs that human touch.
Lactic and acetic acids, yeasts and alcohols develop in sourdough and form CO2, which leavens the bread.
These days, sourdough is largely made for health purposes because this bread is more easily digestible. Since sourdough has already been partially pre-digested, the body is able to absorb the available minerals from rye or other grain varieties more readily. Sourdough has the effect of unlocking grains and making their nutrients available.
Since the dough needs time to rest, however, this goes hand in hand with lots of time, and thus money. Yeasts were discovered in parallel to sourdough.
Yeast is a fungus, a single-celled microorganism that rapidly reproduces when nutrients are abundant.
A time-effective alternative to leaven dough. Whether one bakes bread using yeast or sourdough is, in the end, a matter of preference and time.
Yeast speeds up the processes that occur during dough development. The more I add, the quicker the dough reaches the point at which it's ready to bake. If I want to save time, I add a lot of yeast. The bread sold at budget supermarkets always smells distinctly yeasty.
And yeast has also brought us entirely new bakery goods.
Yeast essentially revolutionized the bakery trade by making possible baked goods that either weren't possible before or were connected with too much work. So basically, everything made with wheat flour, breakfast rolls, pizza, and so on. Yeast gave rise to these things while pushing sourdough baked goods into the background.
And this baked treat wouldn't be around without yeast. It was in 1899 that the first pizza margherita was topped in Italy's national colours: green basil, white mozzarella, and red tomatoes. Yeast also gave us fluffy sandwich bread.
So the origin of the word sandwich, as the story goes, and it's certainly a story that's dear to my heart, it comes from a game of cards, because there was this aristocrat, John Montague, and he supposedly was playing this very, very, very long game, and he got hungry, but he absolutely did not want to leave the table, as presumably he was making lots of money. And so he ordered his valet to go and get him just a really dense meal. He said, "Oh, give me a piece of meat between two bits of bread." And everyone was very surprised and confused by this bizarre food item. But it then became popularized by his other name, which was the 4th Earl of Sandwich. So, yeah, supposedly that's where it comes from.
So, yeast ensures that the crumb is tender and springy. But another use for it was quickly found. Yeast fungus not only leavens dough, it also makes alcohol and CO2 from sugar, and thus gives us beer. Microscopic organisms leaven our bread and turn hops, malt and water into beer.
Somehow bread is always connected with alcohol. On the one hand, because alcohol is produced in the dough itself, which makes the bread more palatable. On the other hand, you can make it from cereal grains, also using the same fermentation processes, though somewhat modified. Other conditions with the same processes take place during beer brewing or whiskey making.
We've come a long way from the traditional bake shop to modern bread production.
The baker in the Middle Ages was an absolutely crucial member of the community, and the baker would be expected to produce high-quality loaves. And if he reduced the quality in any way, left out ingredients, public punishments would lie in store for him, and he would be put in a cage and dipped in the river in full public view so that he would never do that again.
It can be seen as pre-industrial quality assurance. Even today, next to industrial production, we still have craft bakeries like this one, where 6 days a week, bakers toil through the night. Each of these loaves was kneaded using muscle power. Hands can feel if the consistency and temperature are right. Outfitting a machine with this kind of mechanical sensitivity is difficult, and yet an essential step forward for all of us.
By 1850, you get new machinery that can knead bread for you on a scale that's been absolutely impossible before. So after 1850, bread making was completely transformed. You could make it en masse, much cheaper than ever before.
Kneading by hand quickly became an obstacle to producing the large amounts of bread needed in the industrial age. The solution? A kneading machine. It smooths the way to quicker and more hygienic production. While it doesn't require hands, it does require the exact same batter mix to operate smoothly. But when this requirement is met, these machines work absolutely tirelessly.
What I would say is that everything was different in the past. I don't believe that things were better, though. With regard to bakeries, it's a big advantage to have transparency and hygienic requirements that must be observed.
Accused of working with dirty hands and using the kneading trough instead of a handkerchief, the reputation of bakers was maligned for a long time. A lack of hygiene in connection with hand kneading was to be remedied by the introduction of machines, a real selling point. And these new kneading machines quickly became popular. Mechanization was an unstoppable force. Today, industrial production is the rule. It makes bread less expensive, not just to manufacture, but also for the customer. Industrial bread production has evolved rapidly since World War II. A flood of new machines is making greater variety possible. Machines not only handle the kneading, but also the shaping. More and more industrially produced varieties become available. The growth of the factories goes in step with greater and more varied output. Some of the plants have been in operation for decades.
It's all been automated, you know, with sort of almost like production lines. But the upside of that is that it's far more efficient, and that's important if we need to feed many, many people as cheaply as possible.
One of the main differences compared to early large-scale bakeries is that today, the individual processing steps, kneading, proportioning, shaping dough pieces and fermenting, are largely automated. Bread is fermented in these baskets. Experienced eyes recognize and monitor this biological process and make sure that none of the loaves are baked before they're ready.
Bakers bake their bread here. Baking as an art form is very important for us. Is the bread properly shaped? Has the dough been properly fermented? Is the baking process exactly right? A baker must be able to evaluate all these things.
Baking all these breads day by day is an unbelievable achievement. Huge quantities are needed. The global population continues to increase. Specialized continuous feed ovens provide even greater capacity. The baking lines in this industrial bakery produce between 2,000 and 3,000 loaves of bread per hour. These crusty loaves proceed on a perfectly plotted journey every day to reliably fill our supermarket shelves.
Unlike human labor, a machine is tireless. It can produce endless quantities in consistently high quality.
To produce up to 600,000 loaves of bread per day, man, machines and flour must be perfectly synchronized. This avoids fluctuations in taste and quality. But it takes an oven to make bread out of dough. Presumably, the first bread was baked on a hot rock at an open fire. The Egyptians fine-tuned this idea and built the first stone ovens. Such ovens are still used today and require a lot of experience. After the fire has heated up the stone oven for 3 hours, the embers are removed and bread is baked in the residual heat. There was no thermostat or an off-on switch. To reach and hold the desired temperature was an art in itself. Bread has been baked using this traditional, though time-consuming way for thousands of years. The flames of a stone oven impart flavour to bread. It took a long time before modern-day bakers dispensed with fire so that they could bake more quickly and predictably. In order to bake bread, human beings first had to farm and cultivate grains, a decisive step for our transition from hunters and gatherers to settled farmers.
We're all hunter-gatherers, we're all nomadic people moving around, hunting animals, going to the animals, and never staying in one space. Once we decide that cultivating crops can give us a sustainable, reliable supply of food, we can stay in one place. We can grow our wheat, we can grow our grain, we can develop our bread-making technology, and we can stay put, and we can become communities.
This gave them the first clue that settling down and cultivating grain might be the way forward. So instead of nomadic tribes roaming through the land, they stayed in one place and grew grain. Settlements and agriculture and bread are the start of our modern civilization.
Grains not only spared us from going hungry, since they are also durable and can be stored for long periods, it became possible to make provisions for the future. A major step towards that gave us existential security. And to this day, it gives us security, also in the form of these emergency reserves. 800,000 tons of food, for example, are being stored at 150 different sites in Germany. This stockpile would last for several weeks.
Storing grain is there to protect communities. It's useful to store grain for emergencies, for war, for drought, for invading armies, that sort of thing. And even today we have at secret locations emergency storage stores of grain in order to call upon if absolutely necessary.
But it wasn't until high-yield varieties were developed from wild grasses that enough was left over to make warehousing like this possible. The ancestors of today's varieties are stored in this archive. Before we settled down, bread was made from very tiny grass seeds that had to be gathered in nature in a laborious process. With the help of modern technology, today we try to identify plant genes that generate high yields. And yet, this continues to be a drawn-out process of trial and error, just like it was during past millennia.
If you're a scientist trying to develop new types of grain for the future of human nutrition and agriculture, you need a lot of patience because developing a new grain type takes about 12 years.
Crossbreeding the most healthy and highest-yielding cereal plants is still the method of choice. Just how much higher the yields of our modern varieties are can be seen by holding up a modern ear of wheat against its wild ancestors.
So the modern grains that we see today are largely a result of sort of selective breeding, where farmers would choose, you know, the sort of highest yield plants with the thickest grains, and also sort of the narrowest stems so that they could be planted together more densely and more efficiently. And the result of that is over, you know, many generations are these modern day plants that we see.
For today's bread production, we have cereal varieties with ears that are thick and full of grains. Flour production in ancient Egypt started out as very cumbersome work. It takes 7 or 8 hours to produce 2 kilograms of flour using 2 millstones like these.
This is, of course, a very antiquated technique, and surprising for an advanced civilization like ancient Egypt. But there obviously was no desire to change things, since there were enough people who could do this work.
But it's not always like this. A technological evolution, which is still underway, took hold and made it possible to exploit the valuable inside of a kernel.
Over the millennia, the technology for grinding grain has become more and more sophisticated, more and more efficient, more and more automated.
Grinding the grains between two millstones with muscle power alone would soon become a thing of the past. The human pioneering spirit gave us a more effective method, the mill. And over the course of time, it was to evolve rapidly.
The first mills were driven by muscle power, either humans or unfortunate animals like donkeys. The Romans were the first to incorporate the immense energy carried by rivers by building water wheels.
Water-powered mills established themselves right along with windmills. Both take advantage of the forces of nature. And as we know, these are unpredictable. But it is only when the blades catch wind that the millstones are driven. This changed with the advent of smock mills in the 16th century. The entire mill can be rotated to make it independent of the wind direction.
For a long time, grain mills sort of represented a huge leap forward in human ingenuity.
Wind energy drove the millstones without muscle power and turned grain into easily digestible flour, a milestone in our development. Mills are the first prime movers of our time, and they're critical for provisioning a growing population.
To feed a growing population, the bread production process had to become more efficient. And the mill was responsible for that in part. And that phrase, the mill, doesn't just describe the milling of the flour, it's also a mark of excellence for the flour that's produced.
These days, our mills are no longer dependent on wind. Grains are milled into flour by means of electric power. Currently, industrial mills ensure that we humans never run out of flour. Meanwhile, sophisticated methods make an even greater variety of flours possible.
Today's bakers are in constant contact with their millers. And using technology, those mills can create just the right flour for exactly the right resulting bread.
Coarsely grounded whole meat flour for robust breads or finely ground white flour for light, soft loaves. Without the many different flour types, we wouldn't have today's wide range of breads. Bakers need to know what kind of bread they plan to bake so the right flour can be ordered from the miller. Even today, artisan bakers can still feel the different characteristics with their hands.
Millers often say, there is no such thing as the wrong flour. There's only bad applications.
Up until about 200 years ago, it was only possible to make whole wheat flour using coarse millstones. So for a long time that determined the range of breads offered. A new discovery at the beginning of the 19th century would completely change the way in which we mill flour, roller mills. This milling technology was so efficient that it's still used, unchanged, in the industrial mills of our day. The grains are fed into the roller mill from above. The grains are broken open and crushed between two metal corrugated rollers. The trick is that the distance between the rollers can be precisely adjusted. The greater the distance, the coarser the flour. The smaller the distance, the finer the flour. The flours that we use today, especially white flour, go back to the invention of the roller mill.
Schmidt's Blue Ribbon Bread gives you 7 ounces of non-fat milk solids in every loaf, the equal of 90 quarts a year if you serve it regularly. Every sandwich you make, every snack, gives you extra milk.
With the invention of the roller mill, white flour and thus white wheat bread suddenly became available in great quantities. Prior to this, whole wheat flour needed to be sieved in a very elaborate process to get white flour, and this was not affordable for most of the population.
Across many centuries, white bread carried high prestige. It was made for aristocrats and kings, rulers and the wealthy.
The roller mill democratized bread diversity.
Fine, light flours for white, fluffy bread, or more substantial flours with fibre and a more rustic taste?
In fact, the expression toast, with wine, comes from bread, and that's because back in the day, the lords and ladies would soak their toasted bread in the wine to sort of soothe the acidity of it, and then presumably they clunked their glasses together and said toast.
But the abundance of white bread also came with a downside.
Trim, youthful, active, the modern look that spotlights you. The secret? Low-calorie bread. It gives you extra energy.
Those who ate white bread exclusively became sick and overweight, even though the advertisements promised something else. Using just white flour led to bread with low fiber and nutrient content.
Eat Wonder Bread.
But the bread industry tried to take countermeasures. Bread that used to consist of only flour, water and salt was enriched with additives. The new light flour varieties had led to nutrient-poor bread.
Grow bigger and stronger 8 ways.
This desire for white bread has backfired, as our generation now are much less active than previous generations. So now we're turning to the lower calorie, more fibre-rich artisan breads that are popular today.
That's because the nutrient and fibre-rich outer skin, or bran, is filtered out when producing white flour. So today, even modern industrial mills are experiencing growing demand for whole wheat flours. Bread that is made with whole grains has yet another advantage. It makes us feel full longer. It's not just a broad variety of flours that we owe to windmills. Wind energy would soon set more than just heavy millstones into motion.
The mills that were introduced in the early modern period have now become the stimulation, the source for what we now see as sustainable, environmentally friendly energy.
The idea of taking advantage of wind and hydropower and turning it into mechanical energy is something that we owe to bread making. The clever use of energies way beyond what we are physically capable of benefits our civilization. These mills thus went hand in hand with an unforeseeable side effect that's more important today than ever before.
And I mean, these windmills sort of paved the way for the modern design of these wind turbines that we now use to generate our electricity. So they really were the sort of forerunners in renewable energy.
The centuries-old technology of grain mills gives us the opportunity to counteract looming climate change. The spirit of the old mills lives on in today's renewable energies. A single wind turbine with an output of 3 megawatts generates electricity for more than 2,000 households per year.
This set the trend for today's energy-producing water turbines.
Hydropower, too, as one of our oldest sources of energy, is highly topical again thanks to climate change. 17%, so almost 1/5 of the energy worldwide, is generated by hydropower. Evolving technologies can sometimes bear incredible fruit. Today's industrial mills also use wind and water-generated energy. The industrial scale has amplified everything. 500 tons of grain is processed here on a daily basis. There are no surpluses, as only ordered quantities are processed. The grain is immediately checked for smell, pesticides, and microbiological purity. 25 tons of grain are transported by road directly from the farmer to the mill silos for processing. These cereal grains are the basis of our nourishment. But before they can end up in a loaf of bread, these grains still have a long way to go. That's because these kernels are a natural product. that owe their purity and safety to modern technology. For thousands of years, this is not something that should be taken for granted. In the next step, the grain kernels are thoroughly cleaned.
During threshing, the stones are pulled in via the cereal plant and its root. The farmer moves across the field in the harvester and automatically has contact with the soil, and thus also the stones.
But it's not just field stones that pose a danger. This scanner protects us from a toxin that has been lurking in cereal since primeval times, an almost black mass called ergot, which infects the ear of a cereal plant.
Ergot is a fungus that affects grains, especially rye, and it looks like a tiny black mushroom which can be mistaken for a grain. So if it gets ground up into the flour, it could end up in the resulting bread, which would be fine, except that ergot is highly toxic.
People in the Middle Ages were completely at the mercy of this hidden danger that lurked in their flour. Ergot poisoning led to convulsions and hallucinations. A mere 5 to 10 grams were lethal. Outbreaks of ergotism were such a threat that the monks of St. Anthony set up special hospitals.
And it developed a condition called hellfire or Antonius fire, which led to terrible itching and terrible scratching and sometimes limbs having to be amputated, people going mad.
Colour scanning now protects us from this threat by targeting the dark ergot and removing it with the help of a blast of high-pressure air.
There was no way of filtering it, no way of cleaning it, and no quality checks like you get today.
Fortunately, ergotism is a thing of the past. These colour scanners have spared many people from a painful death.
What we're dealing with here is a typical ergot body as it occurs in nature. Today, our colour scanner reliably identifies and removes them. In the past, in the Middle Ages, this couldn't be done, and many people got sick. The baking process can't destroy the poisonous alkaloids that ergot produces, and so they were consumed by people along with the food they ate.
It's the alkaloids that are found in ergot fungi that cause ergotism in humans.
One of the effects of eating ergot-infected bread was to suffer from nervous seizures or fits, and also suffer hallucinations. And in this very religious society, it must have seemed that those who'd eaten ergot-infected bread must have been possessed by the devil.
Even as late as 1951, one area of France captured the headlines. Pont-Saint-Esprit, the village with the bread that makes you crazy.
Hundreds of people in the village became desperately ill, but on top of that, they were having many very vivid hallucinations. I think some people even killed themselves. It was really bad.
Psychoses, anxiety, and hallucinations gripped the little village and led to several deaths. More than 200 people were treated in hospitals or psychiatric institutions. It seemed like the village population had succumbed to madness, an outbreak of mass hallucinations. Evidence of ergot was found in the baker's contaminated flour. The eyewitness reports corresponded with the results of a self-experiment conducted by the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann. My whole environment had transformed itself in a most frightening way. Familiar objects took on a menacing quality. They were in motion as though they were alive. The lady next door was no longer Mrs. R, but a wicked witch with a grotesque face. By coincidence, 3 years earlier, Hofmann had synthesized LSD from ergot in his lab.
I mean, imagine what it must have been like for these people who were probably largely superstitious folks, believing in all sorts of, spirits and so on, to suddenly having these sort of LSD-like hallucinations. It must have been absolutely terrifying.
Along with industrially produced bread, we still have small bakeries today as well. Craft bakeries attach a lot of importance to working with real sourdough. They try not to rely on quick-rise yeasts or additives that make the dough rise faster and allow plenty of time for the dough to rest. Nevertheless, they must remain competitive.
You have to aim for a seamless transition so that the ovens are always in use and we can make money. If an oven is empty, this causes unnecessary energy costs. We can't operate like that.
The downside of industrial bread production is that small bakeries are going out of business. This bakery has been able to defy that trend. So this is how the big competitors operate. Loaves are churned out on conveyor belts. Progressing along the oven, they cover more than 80 meters. They move alongside a conveyor belt through various hot zones where water vapor can be added for a crispy crust. Finally, perfectly baked loaves emerge. Conveyor ovens bake loaves of bread in quantities that exceed anything that was possible before. Another factor that gives us bread in great quantities and small prices is that machines have taken control, in contrast to artisan bakers.
You can tell it has a proper crust. It's wonderful. It bounces back. It's elastic. I'll push on it very hard now. Now, if this happened with normal pressure, it wouldn't be a good quality loaf. The bread would bunch up in one's mouth and wouldn't have much flavor either. This loaf has lots of air voids which develop the taste and aroma. And you can hear it too. It has a proper crust. It's a flawless bread. When I see a loaf like that, my heart sings.
My favorite kind of bread is probably a French baguette. My least favorite is one of those like dry, bitter, dark breads. Ugh. I like my bread like really doughy and squishy, which is, I always got in trouble with my mum because I'd always scoop the middle out of the French bread and leave the crust. That's the good bit.
My preferred bread is a crusty Italian pane rustico, so rustic bread, really raw, really rustic, with olive oil and balsamic vinegar, warmed up, possibly with a nice glass of Chianti on the side.
My favourite bread has to be sourdough bread. I am a sourdough mother myself. I have my sourdough Betty, who lives in the refrigerator at home. And for me, sourdough has it all. It's got the crunchy crust, it's got the fluffy, moist inside, and it's got that distinctive acid tang. Sourdough is perfect.
A loaf of bread is more than nourishment for the body. It gives us comfort and a sense of security. It's among our most constant foods. For thousands of years, it has been part of almost every meal. And bread is politics like hardly any other food. When there's a hike in the price of bread, it can disturb the balance of power.
For politicians and governments around the world, the price of grain is an important factor in keeping their country calm. If weather-related crop failures or suddenly inaccessible trade routes cause grain to become more expensive, it can have a real knock-on effect on the government, as individual workers have to pay 3 times the normal rate for their daily bread.
To this day, bread is an essential. When the supply is low, it leads to political unrest. Governments have always tried to keep the price of bread low to maintain their grip on power. An extremely cold winter in France destroyed most of the cereal harvest in 1789 and led to a doubling of the price of bread. This further inflamed the fury of an already agitated populace. What followed was the outbreak of the French Revolution. The price of bread is closely linked with the weather. Harvest failures and diseases can cause prices to explode. The Arab Spring was also triggered like this.
Bread is a hugely important topic. Wars and crises can be caused by bread shortages that set off waves of unrest. It's the primary basis for everything, for politics, for the social system, and for human sustenance.
And global warming is making the weather more extreme. Climate change threatens the basis of our human existence, our cereals.
A hotter climate means we need heat-resistant plants, and we need to create some kind of reliable and nutritious source of food for our growing population.
Climate change necessitates more hardy types of grain. Researchers are looking for gene variants in the genetic material of plants that will make them more resistant. This would ensure good yields and stable harvest results in a changing climate.
How can we protect our grains and our plants for potential climate change? We can breed species of plants in order to produce hardier plants against various types of climate change.
To defy climate change, we need the entire gene pool of cereals available worldwide. The Global Seed Vault was established for this purpose. Protected in the permafrost of a mountain in the Arctic Ocean, over 4 million types of cereal can be stored here in order to secure the heritage and future of our Earth.
The grains that we use now are almost nothing like the natural ones that our ancestors turned into bread. Nowadays, the yields have increased many times over, the ears are bigger, the stalks are shorter but stronger, so break less often. And this new grain is an important part of our supply of food for the future.
We have built a solid basis on which to secure the food supply for future generations. We are, after all, able to draw on a wealth of information. Over millennia, humankind has spared no effort, nor has its pioneering spirit languished when it comes to improving bread production.
These days, if you buy bread off the supermarket shelves, it's sort of almost like production lines of pieces of bread being cut up and so on. But the upside of that is that it's far more efficient. And that's important if we need to feed many, many people as cheaply as possible.
From the field into the mill, from grain to flour, from the bakery to a fragrant loaf. The long genesis of a grain to bread is testimony to our inventive genius. Dexterity is needed along with technology and the innovations that facilitated this work.
Bread is a great food. It's been part of our culture and our diets for so long that I'm sure it will continue to be part of it in the future.
As long as we exist, there will also be bread. But how we produce it, which cereal grains are milled, and finally, how exactly we want it to taste, this will be subject to constant change.
For humans, low temperatures can be deadly. But cold can also be fun. We love things cold as ice. Cold is good. It preserves. So we came up with a really cool invention that even expresses our personalities.
It's actually quite deeply personal and can be quite exposing about who you are, what you like, what you don't like.
We've learned tricks from our furry friends, making the most of natural resources. But in our development of this great invention, we've ended up harming our environment and put our planet in great danger.
It breaks down ozone, and ozone is the stuff that keeps us safe.
But this invention has done so much good, saving lives, even helped create lives. It has changed the way we live. It's played a part in the liberation of women.
And they were free to go and be more productive members of society.
Without it, the world would be a very different place. Most households have one.
It can be big, it can be small, some are the size of a house.
The biggest one ever built is circular. Its circumference measures a whopping 27 kilometers. This is the past. present, and future of the fridge. In almost every home that has electricity, you will find a white rectangular appliance with that signature hum. Fridges are vital for our modern lives, and we invest in them big time. The global market is predicted to keep growing. Most revenue is generated in China, over $26 billion in 2019. Buying a new fridge used to be a big deal in any household, a major purchase. These days, you can order a fridge one day and have it delivered the next. While all fridges keep things cold, some fridges themselves are cool, desirable luxury goods that come with a hefty price tag. But their environmental impact means the fridge must undergo a radical overhaul to remain a must-have machine. This innocent-looking product has changed the way we live and the way we eat. So how did people cope before the fridge? Fridges have transformed the way we preserve food, and it's hard to imagine life without them. But keeping food to eat later has always been a necessity. The story of refrigeration starts long before the invention of the fridge.
Having a world without a fridge, I think, would completely shift how we stock food, how long we can keep things, how much we rely on, the land and the weather and what is around us. And I think we'd have a much more immediate palate in terms of relying on what's grown.
We had various ways of trying to make our food last through the times when fresh food was scarce. We pickled vegetables in vinegar. We smoked meat and fish. Salting was another popular method to preserve meat for harsher times ahead. A cut of meat in a tub, completely surrounded and covered by salt, left out in cool weather, could last for years. Without stored foods, starvation, illness, and malnutrition are likely.
Even before the invention of the fridge, they were coming up with methods to store food, all this sort of curing and pickling, all of that was to try and reduce the amount of bacteria in there.
However, it's another method of food preservation that has become the most popular. We'd figured out that keeping food as cold as possible made it last longer. This fundamental idea had been around for centuries, even as far back as the ancient Egyptians. Refrigeration. But thousands of years ago, electricity was yet to be discovered. So how did people keep food cold enough to avoid it going bad?
So the earliest forms of refrigeration are, of course, completely natural. I mean, absolutely the earliest form of refrigeration is just leaving something somewhere cold, whether that's outside overnight or whether it's in a cave or in something you've dug.
From the most primitive times, people started to put down roots and live in one place so they could store things. From then, civilizations through the ages and around the world learned to harvest ice from rivers and lakes in order to help preserve food. The Hebrews, ancient Greeks, and Romans had all developed a preserving technique. They had learned to place large amounts of snow into storage pits, then covered it with insulating materials like grass.
So you find the Romans bringing snow in and digging pits and filling it with snow so you can put your food in there. The ancient Egyptians apparently left jars of water outside overnight, which were then brought in so that they could be used to keep food fresh during the day.
For millennia, ancient civilizations have made their homes in the desert. To make their food last longer, cold storage was vital. But how do you keep ice in a desert? It might seem surprising that the answer lies in a country sandwiched between arid Arabian deserts and the subtropical Eastern European area, Iran, once known as Persia. The Persians are believed to have been the first to use cold storage to preserve food as far back as 400 BCE. They designed this building, called a yakchal, as a type of earth refrigerator. It was cold enough to keep ice frozen in a deep storage area, while outside, summer temperatures were raging at 40 degrees Celsius or more. Ice could be cut and transported from the nearby mountains to get a head start. Or water could actually freeze inside a chilled yakchal.
If you think of the first fridges, they're really kind of the ice houses that were made. What that meant for certain communities was a lot more of them are going to live through the winter because the food they'd harvested in the summer could be kept fresher. So it's really a matter of life and death, and I think that's probably the most fundamental transformation you can have. I've got a fridge, I live. I don't have a fridge, I die.
Storing ice in cold yakchals kept it frozen to use in summer, when there was no ice. This was the forerunner to our modern thermal energy storage systems, such as solar panels. They trap heat from the sun during the day, which provides us with energy and heat when we need it. Humans are not the only species to have used cold to preserve food. Wild animals have been doing it for even longer. One creature that has perfected cold storage is the Arctic fox. Swedish research has shown that foxes store surplus food in the warmer summer months. In winter, when fresh food becomes scarce, they dig down into the permafrost for a well-hidden, tasty meal. The layer of soil under the snow remains below zero all year round, preserving the food for up to a year. It's not only the fox. The wolverine is another animal that uses cold to preserve its supplies. This wolverine will cache large chunks of meat scavenged from carcasses of other animals, burying it under ice and snow. Months later, the wolverine's incredible sense of smell helps it sniff out its secret stash, even under more than a meter's depth of snow. Then its jaws do the rest, crunching through the frozen meat. Animals have evolved these adaptations to use nature's own freezer. But human food preservation demonstrates much more ingenuity. We needed to replicate what came free in a harsh winter: guaranteed freezing temperatures. We had no problem keeping things chilled in a cold climate, but how could people stop food rotting in the warmer months? In colonial days, a common cause of death was known as the summer complaint, simply due to eating spoiled food. Microscopic bacteria living on food go crazy in the warm.
There's going to be trace amounts of bacteria in absolutely everything. I mean, there's tons on my skin, even at this moment. What will happen is that bacteria will want to multiply and multiply and multiply and eat away at the things, and that can, they're not going to be good for you if you ingest huge amounts. So at the trace level, they're fine. And actually, by having the temperature lower, that sort of inhibits the amount that the bacteria can multiply. So it keeps it at that safe level, rather than allowing them to get to this state where they're going to be causing you illness.
It is recommended to keep food at room temperature for a maximum of 2 hours, but the sooner the better into the fridge.
Fridges are great for keeping food for longer because basically what
makes food go bad are either fungi or bacteria that are living on the food start breaking it down. And by refrigerating them, by making them cold, they aren't able to do this breaking down process as effectively. It takes them much, much longer, so it just slows them down, puts them to sleep.
One of our most important foodstuffs that is spoiled quickly when not stored cool is milk. But the most dangerous bacteria to human health that are found in milk are killed when the milk is heated to below boiling point. A groundbreaking discovery. The process of pasteurization, named after its inventor Louis Pasteur, makes fresh milk safe. But that great benefit doesn't last long if the milk isn't then kept chilled. It's safe and a great cool drink. But back in 1600s Europe, a significant development was around the corner, which would change our drinking habits forever. A new trend was taking over, something we certainly haven't lost the taste for today: cold drinks. Europeans simply couldn't get enough of them. This led to the invention of a new cooling technique from a surprising source. Saltpeter was first used for more explosive purposes, like making fireworks and gunpowder. The ancient Chinese invention, fireworks, still handmade like this, is thanks to an explosive chemical concoction that was discovered 2,000 years ago and included saltpeter. But alchemists found that saltpeter could also cause the opposite effect. Mixed with water, it becomes very cold. Long neck bottles were rotated with a solution of water and dissolved saltpeter. This action produces very low temperatures and eventually makes ice. Saltpeter, also known as Chinese salt, helped cool the containers storing history's first recorded ice cream. Cream ice is known to have been served to the English King Charles II in 1671. It was made using a special flavor, orange blossom. Does that mean ice cream is an English invention? Far from it. In fact, the idea goes back much further, to the Romans at least, which would make it Italian. In the early 17th century, cream ice was effectively snow flavored with fruits and juices, probably similar to what we call snow cones or slush puppies today. But it was the French who devised the first recipe of modern ice cream, using dairy. In 1660, the first cafe to open in Paris sold its ice cream to the public. It was made from blending milk, butter, cream, and eggs, which more closely resembles some present-day recipes. It wasn't until the end of the 17th century that there was an explosion of variety, when flavors like chocolate, lemon, and pumpkin burst onto the scene. This was the start of something big. Today, ice cream is sold and served everywhere, no matter how hot or cold the weather. Where would we be without cold drinks and ice cream?
We've developed these sort of tastes for cold things, not only just for keeping things good for longer. Cold drinks are incredibly refreshing on a hot summer's day. Ice cream is amazing. You wouldn't have that unless we'd come up with this sort of refrigeration technology to be able to keep things cold.
It's one of our top tasty solutions for keeping cool, and we just love it, whatever the flavor. In 2019, Americans spent the most in the world on ice cream, enough to mean every American guzzled $209 worth of the stuff. No sign of saltpeter to keep things cool these days. Our ancestors found the white substance was expensive and unsustainable. What else would preserve food cheaply? The major breakthrough came in 1756 at Glasgow University in Scotland, where an academic's chemistry lab was arguably the birthplace of refrigeration. Experimentation found that boiling liquid diethyl ether vigorously made it cool, and it has an extremely low boiling point. It was a huge discovery, the first chemical refrigerant, though its potential wasn't realized straight away. However, today's fridges are based on this principle. Your fridge contains a simple but clever system that uses a chemical refrigerant to transfer heat from inside the fridge out into the air. The refrigerant starts as a warm liquid inside the coil on the back of the fridge. From here, it runs through a valve into the coil on the inside of your fridge. Inside this coil, the pressure is lower. This pressure drop causes the refrigerant to evaporate into a gas. As it travels through the coil, it absorbs heat from inside the fridge, warming the gas up and making the fridge colder. After exiting the fridge, the now heated gas moves through a compressor back into the high-pressure coil on the back of the fridge. As it travels up through the coil on the outside of the fridge, the now liquid refrigerant releases the heat it picked up from inside the fridge into the atmosphere. It arrives back at the valve, and the cycle can begin all over again. That's how it works. And here's how a modern fridge is made. This company manufactures bespoke fridges for the catering sector. Same thing as your fridge at home, just on a bigger scale.
Commercial refrigeration is kind of like what trucks are to the car industry. It's sort of, just a beefed-up version of a fridge.
Bigger, better. Tailor-made to suit a restaurant or a hotel's particular requirements. It all starts with a computer design.
From the 3D, we generate a DXF, which is a flat pattern of the part we're producing. Once it's designed in 3D, it heads over to 2D and then it gets laser cut.
After they're cut, the pieces go to the assembly section. Here, workers take a shell and install the different coils, valve, and compressor. The electrical work is completed, and the doors are fitted. Finally, the refrigerant is put in and tested. Then the fridge is taken to quality control, systems testing, and off it goes to a restaurant. We were still a long way from modern refrigeration at the turn of the 19th century when we couldn't let go of ice. In 1803, an American dairy farmer wanted to keep his butter fresh in transit to market. His answer was the world's first icebox. It was a simple wooden tub with a smaller tin box inside it, containing the butter. The space between the two containers was stuffed with ice. It successfully kept the farmer's butter cool and fresh until he sold it at market. This was the start of providing us with the ability to transport food by road without it losing quality during the journey, however long the journey. That farmer was onto something. Refrigerated transport today is the backbone of our food distribution industry and is growing globally for both chilled and frozen foods. It means we can all enjoy wide and exotic ranges of food in ways our ancestors could never have imagined, when all we had was a crude icebox. Demand for frozen foods for cooking in restaurants is one of the key drivers. And the global refrigerated food transportation business is growing fastest in the North America region. The idea of global transportation of food was still a fantasy 200 years ago. We just needed a reliable solution for keeping it fresh. The answer lay in the freezing North American winters. It was to kickstart a whole new food industry and change the way people ate: ice harvesting. The story began in 1805 when two wealthy brothers from Boston were at a family picnic, enjoying cold drinks and ice cream. They joked about how these rare luxuries would be the envy of all the people in warmer climates. For Frederick Tudor, one of the brothers, this was the light bulb moment. Knowing that in winter, Boston is covered in snow and ice, Tudor thought about how, further south in the USA, ice was almost unheard of. He decided to create a business by harvesting and then transporting ice to these warmer parts of the country, and beyond, to other parts of the world. This 1930s home movie filmed south of Boston gives an idea of what the early ice harvesting operation would have looked like. The harvesters would create more ice by pushing needle bars into fresh snowfall. This action brought the water up, wet the snow, and produced more ice. Ingenious. Then they'd measure and cut the ice into blocks by hand using saws. Soon, Tudor was shipping over 130 tons of ice a year to places like the Caribbean, Europe, and even as far as India. Chilled drinks were his next target. Tudor traveled around the USA to convince bar owners to buy his ice. He taught restaurants how to make ice cream and became known as the Ice King. He also reached out to doctors and hospitals to convince them that ice was the perfect way to cool their feverish patients. And since then, refrigeration has played a vital role in the medical industry. Pharmaceuticals rely on it to retain the integrity and effectiveness of medicinal drugs in transit and in storage. The worldwide pharmaceutical cold chain logistics business was worth $16.6 billion in 2019. We should also keep some medicines that we've been prescribed in the fridge at home while they're in use.
Certain medicines should be stored in the fridge, and the way in which we can tell whether medicines should be stored in the fridge are usually in the little leaflet which comes with those types of medicines.
Fridges are essential for storing blood, for example, until the next transfusion is needed. Refrigeration is also vital for the latest medical and genetic processes that are helping advance the human race. Human organs are refrigerated until they're required for transplant surgery. Our fertility clinics depend on the refrigeration of donor sperm, eggs, and embryos. This Russian facility is storing stem cells for often life-saving treatments. But back in the 1800s, people hadn't realized just how much they needed ice until the entrepreneurial Henry Tudor made them try it. Once they had seen the benefits of keeping things cold, people couldn't get enough of ice. The ice harvesting industry could now bring ice to your door. Then, with any luck, you had a special new place to store it, an ice box. The Iceman would drive in on a horse-drawn ice wagon. Using ice hooks, he would unload a nice square chunk of ice, haul it into a person's home, and lift it into the icebox. As iceboxes developed, they became desirable pieces of furniture, admired and handsome. Almost every home but the poorest had an icebox. But this insatiable demand for ice came at a cost. In 1907, almost 15 million tons of ice were consumed, nearly triple the amount in 1880. No lake or pond was safe from ice harvesting. However, with industrialization and urbanization, water started to harbor health problems. Harvested ice as a refrigeration agent became risky. Clean, reliable sources were harder to find as natural ice became contaminated with pollution and sewage. Problems first bubbled up in the brewing industry. Soon, the meatpacking and dairy industries began to be affected. So, there were two problems with using plain ice. One was the health risks from ice created from polluted water. The second was that natural ice production was seasonal. We needed a safe, artificial way of freezing that didn't rely on the unpredictable weather. Inventors had spent the second half of the 19th century striving to produce a small, affordable machine that could create ice in the home, in a refrigerator. But who exactly was responsible for this great invention?
I think there's several people who invent the fridge. The basic idea of the fridge is a pretty easily understood one. It's not that different from the natural methods of refrigeration we're used to using.
Apalachicola, a town in Florida, looks very different now to the 1850s when there was a vital development in refrigeration here. Dr. John Gorey invented a groundbreaking machine with a simple system capable of creating ice. However, his machine was not intended to keep food fresh. Instead, his invention was designed to cool down his patients who were suffering with the deadly virus, yellow fever. He had become convinced that keeping them cool would help to cure them. Gorey devised a contraption that injected cool air around his feverish patients. His invention took us another big step closer to the development of the domestic fridge and the concept of air conditioning. Keeping cool is a modern necessity, though today's air conditioning is more directly based on subsequent American research at the turn of the 20th century into humidity control. We can decide how cool we want the atmosphere around us to be using technology originally based on refrigeration, removing the moisture from ambient humid air, which stops us from overheating. But this technology is a long way from what was available in the 1870s, and that was a problem for New Zealand's sheep farmers. These days, New Zealand has 5.5 sheep for every person in its population. Sheep farming is still big business and relies 100% on refrigeration to reach international markets. Back towards the end of the 19th century, its main export, wool, was suffering from a global slump in market value. So farmers wanted to sell their meat further afield as a new income stream. But meat couldn't be shipped long distances because there was no way to keep it fresh. Shippers were open to experimentation with new coolants. And finally, a ship called the Dunedin was refitted with a revolutionary new shipping refrigeration unit. She set off in 1882, loaded with 5,000 frozen animal carcasses, on what was to be the first commercially successful refrigerated shipping voyage the world had ever seen. The foundation for the industry was laid. It was also the foundation of New Zealand's significant freezing and frozen food industries.
The range of people who are interested in this is enormous. There's endless variations on this refrigeration model. It's a good idea, and like almost all good ideas, lots of people have it.
Refrigerated or reefer container shipping operates on an epic scale today. The global fleet of these containers specifically was reckoned to total 2 million by 2019. Current technology allows us to carry anything from flowers to food to pharmaceuticals in temperatures that range from a lightly chilled 4 degrees Celsius to a super cold -60 degrees Celsius for things like fish being shipped long distances. Every time we grab a frozen meal out of the freezer compartment, we should take a moment to think about the man who pioneered another chilling aspect to the way we eat, Clarence Bob Birdseye. From 1912, working alongside the Inuits of Canada, he noticed something that would revolutionize the world of frozen food. The fish caught by the Inuit fishermen would freeze almost immediately when pulled from the water in the wintry conditions. Birdseye noted that the fish retained their flavor and texture even when defrosted months later. He experimented with freezing peas. He found blanching peas immediately after picking and then fast freezing them resulted in a frozen pea which was eye-catchingly green when defrosted. Birdseye became obsessed with finding the potential limits to the food freezing process, and the frozen food business was born. This global frozen foods industry was expected to be worth over $156 billion by 2020. By the time Birdseye was dreaming up his frozen peas, we had the ability to stay warm all over our homes with central heating. And there were plenty of devices to celebrate around the house, if we could afford them. For example, we'd gone from a world just a few decades before when only 24% of houses had running water and laundry was a major operation. In 1900, 98% of households still used a scrub board like this to wash their clothes. It was women's work, but everything was changing rapidly. Household appliances were being invented to make life easier, like tumble dryers, electric irons, washing machines, and vacuum cleaners. And the first mass-market electric refrigerator arrived. It had a thermostat and the first ice cube tray. It not only changed the way we store food, it helped modernize and transform society. Later, we began to enjoy the benefits of freezers and microwaves to quickly defrost as technological boundaries stretched further. The impact of all these labor-saving devices, and the fridge in particular, literally changed lives.
So the fridge is one of the cornerstones of a functioning modern economy. It changes the economics, it changes the health, it changes the amount of free time you have. It's just one of the most fantastic inventions of all time.
The biggest effect of domestic appliances on our society was felt by women. In 1900, 5% of married women had jobs. By 1980, that number had jumped to 51%. Thanks, in part, to the introduction of new appliances like the fridge.
It enabled women, because women were usually the ones left in charge of stocking the kitchen and preparing the food. And so that would be something they'd have to go and do daily because food wouldn't keep more than a day or two. But now they could just do the shopping once a week, stick it in the fridge, and then they were free to go and be more productive members of society and work and boost the economy. So it really sort of gave us another 50% addition to the workforce.
In 1900, a woman spent on average 58 hours per week on household chores. By 1975, it was down to just 18 hours. One of the chores that had always taken up so much time was shopping, which had to be done almost daily. This is fundamentally how fridges made such a big difference to women.
If you can't keep things cool, you have to buy things more frequently. You have to shop every other day in order to get the milk, in order to get the butter, in order to get, the things that you want. So it has the capacity to free up time. It's a labour-saving device as well as a way of improving hygiene and making cooking easier.
Unfortunately, fridges were having a huge but sinister impact on the planet that was completely invisible, yet a threat to life itself. In the early days, we use refrigerant liquid gases such as ammonia because it has a low boiling point and it's cheap. But after a while, synthetic refrigerants were seen as the future. The magic answer was known as Freon, but it later became infamous under the abbreviated name CFC, chlorofluorocarbon. CFCs became the standard for almost all domestic refrigerators after World War II. The environment became a top priority in the 1970s and 80s, when CFCs were exposed as greenhouse gases and a threat to our precious ozone layer.
Refrigerants such as CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, are actually pretty bad for the environment. For example, they go up into the stratosphere where they're broken down by ultraviolet light. So CFCs are a carbon atom attached with 2 chlorine and 2 fluorines. When they're broken up by ultraviolet light, you get the chlorine atoms released, and the chlorine atom is no good for the environment.
These CFCs have an enormous effect, which we are witnessing today with climate change.
It breaks down ozone, and ozone is the stuff that keeps us safe, and it goes all around the globe. So what happens instead is you get gaps where there's not enough ozone and ultraviolet light makes its way to the Earth. The consequences of this are, of course, the increased temperature of the Earth. It warms up, the warming that we're told about, but also you get increased ultraviolet light meeting people, so you get increased cancer, increased mutations, and increased blindness.
So the negative impact of fridges is deadly serious. Now, energy-efficient and environmentally friendly fridge designs are the top priority without using CFCs. Ammonia is again being used as a natural refrigerant, along with safer synthetic substitutes.
Don't panic quite yet. There's lots of research going on to find better and more green options to keep things cold, but without harming the planet.
In some countries, we are now much more careful about refrigerator disposal, so that sites like this in landfills will no longer exist. But anomalies remain in global policies on climate change. For example, CFCs are banned throughout the European Union member countries on domestic fridges, but not industrial ones. And fridges using CFCs are not banned at all in developing world countries. However, evidence suggests that it's electricity generation to run our fridges that is the biggest culprit of CO2 emissions, not the CFCs. Scientists have said that refrigeration and air conditioning are responsible for consuming 1/5 of the energy produced globally. So the finger points towards developing yet more energy-efficient coolants than we have already. There's one refrigerator that dwarfs them all. Deep in the heart of Europe, in Switzerland, lies a circular, tubular fridge, which is capable of the most extraordinary scientific research. This fridge measures in at a staggering 27 kilometers in circumference. But it isn't used to store food or beverages. The mega-sized Hadron Collider is the world's largest particle accelerator. By smashing protons into one another at mind-bending speeds in space-like conditions, scientists hope to find answers to some of the most important questions about the origins of our universe. The Hadron Collider is not only massive, but also freezing. A standard fridge chills at around 4.5 degrees Celsius. The Collider can shatter that at minus 271 degrees Celsius. Almost absolute zero. As cool as theoretically possible anywhere in the universe. The domestic fridge has also become more futuristic. This high-end machine will feature a touchscreen interface with connectivity to the internet. It will have internal cameras and the ability for you to interact with its features using your smartphone or tablet when you're away from home. A must for control freaks.
I think the smart fridge is a really interesting idea because I think it tells you what you're missing, what you need to replenish, and the things that are going out of date. And it's really interesting from a health point of view because technology is advancing in such a way that actually we can become more accurate about best before dates, because right now it's a guesstimate. And so often we're throwing food out before it really needs to be thrown out. And so smart fridges will decrease waste, and that can only be a good thing.
Managing our shopping lists and knowing exactly what we've got in the fridge will surely make us more efficient.
I'm slightly terrified by the idea of a fridge that's cleverer than I am.
And in our sometimes frivolous world, there have even been calls to celebrate your fridge and remember to look after it. In 1999, one of the fridge manufacturing companies in the United States dreamt up the idea of a National Clean Out Your Refrigerator Day, inside and out. It's true that you might not know what's lurking at the back of your fridge, and there could be cause for concern. Rubber gloves and a bucket of hot soapy water are advised.
I honestly have not cleaned out my fridge for a while, and it was the most disgusting thing I've done for a long time. It's really important to have a clean fridge, and my fridge typically is full of things like jams that are out of date and things like that, and I had a good old clear out, and I feel lighter.
You might need to consider clearing your fridge out so you can keep other things in it. There's no end to people's inventiveness for cold storage. Circumstances can drive people to use their fridge to cool down the most unexpected items.
I used to have a girlfriend who used to put her knickers in the fridge on hot days. So she'd come down and she said it was fantastic. I think it probably is the weirdest thing I've ever seen in the fridge, yes. Darling, there's a pair of knickers in the fridge. Yes, no.
So the weirdest thing that I put was in a freezer were my computer hard drives, because my computer horrendously crashed, and it was making these horrible noises. And actually, by putting it in the freezer, what you end up doing is you sort of contract all the metal in it, and so it allowed it to operate for about half an hour at a time, and then I could extract the data whilst it was running. And so it meant I got to save a lot of stuff that otherwise I would have completely lost.
Refrigeration is also very useful at the wrong end of life, for dead bodies. Human-sized fridges are available to store bodies at the morgue before being disposed of. Refrigeration is very effective in keeping a body intact for a long time. We know this from real-life examples. Take Otzi, for example. He died a mere 5,300 years ago or more, and was preserved naturally in ice until he was discovered by chance in 1991 in his glacial burial site in the Alps. Now he lies in a cold cell in the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Italy, kept chilled and moist as he would have been in the ice. The condition of his body was so good that scientists are able to tell he'd been murdered. And what was in his last meal? It was wild goat. You might not know that the beauty industry recommends cold storage to get the best out of your makeup, especially foundation. The cold temperatures will stop the oils from spoiling.
The fridge that I really want is the makeup fridge, where you can store all your makeup products inside this fridge, and it keeps them cool and working more effectively because they're at the right temperature, rather than getting all hot and messy.
Even flowers should be kept in the cold before you're ready to enjoy them in a vase. The chilly environment helps stop them wilting, like they would if left at room temperature. Whatever people choose to keep in their fridge, apparently the contents say a lot about the owner.
See, now that's an interesting question about what has somebody got in their fridge. It's actually quite deeply personal and can be quite exposing about who you are, what you like, what you don't like, what's missing. Is your fridge empty? Does that mean you're quite mean? Is your fridge full? Does that mean you're quite generous? So I think it has all those associations with it.
One thing is for certain, having fridges in our lives has been a game changer.
The fridge is a great invention because it enables ordinary people to eat decently in a way that they weren't able to before.
So by having refrigerators, we've been able to store food for longer, in fact, transport food around the world. It's really completely changed everyone's lives.
From the first prototypes to the latest high-tech designs, the fridge is perhaps the most important appliance in the house. Without it, we might all be living on a diet of pickles and salt-preserved meat. But it's also an invention that changed the way we conduct our daily lives. From the outside, some fridges appear perhaps unremarkable, but what we put inside them has created a whole different world. The latest fridges are becoming more efficient and more environmentally friendly. Who knows what the next generation of fridges will look like? 3/4 of the world's homes have a fridge. All those owners would probably agree that the fridge is one very cool invention.